Welcome to another episode of TMI Tuesdays, the women's health podcast where nothing is off limits. I'm Lauren, your new favorite vagina, aka women's health physio, and I'm here to have honest, practical, and unfiltered conversations about women's health across every stage of life. If you enjoy this episode, I'd absolutely love it if you subscribed on Spotify and shared it with someone who might also benefit. Thanks for tuning in. Let's get started. Hello and welcome back to TMI Tuesdays. It's Lauren here, and I am joined today with a friend and colleague, Alex Thompson. Alex owns Tidal Motion Physiotherapy, a solo practice in Victoria, BC, and she holds a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Dance from York University and a Master's of Science in Physical Therapy from the University of Alberta. Her career has spanned both public and private practice, though she currently focuses her practice on pelvic health and dance physio. So I'm excited to have her join me today to chat a little bit about her dance background and also just about some of the challenges and things that come up around women's health and dance and pelvic health. I think she has a really unique perspective on all of these things, and we've gotten into some deep conversations about some of these things ourselves. So excited to have her on. Thank you so much for joining us today, Alex.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, some good topics that we're going to dive into today. So why don't we start off by you introducing yourself a little bit more to our listeners, maybe give us a bit of an idea of your background, your dance background, and also how you got into physio and how your practice has evolved to what it is now.
Yeah, so I grew up dancing from the age of 3 all the way up to through high school, and I decided to do a degree in dance, which I don't think a lot of people realize you can do. So I did an undergrad degree at York University, and yeah, it was 4 years of technique classes, but then also kind of composition, dance history, dance writing. At the time, York's goal was to create thinking dancers and dancing thinkers was their unofficial tagline. So it wasn't a conservatory program. It was really geared towards people going off and doing other things, maybe in the arts world, or, I wanted to be a lawyer initially. So that was my plan. There are people that graduated, and one is a national level news anchor. So there are lots of different people that came out of that program. My initial plan was to go to law school. And I eventually shifted to physio because I spent a ton of time in physio in my dance degree. And I don't think it was done very well looking back on it now. We had a physio clinic in the basement of our building, which was amazing. And we paid $20 for a session because it was kind of subsidized, but it wasn't good physio, really. So I decided that I really liked anatomy. I would go to my friends' physio appointments, so it seemed like a good career choice. So I went to the University of Alberta, and then, I think quite early in my career, I started treating dancers in private practice when I moved back to Victoria, so like a year and a half after graduating. And I just happened to know a lot of the dance community here, and so it's been a very gradual, slow increase to the point where it's now 50% of my caseload, which is awesome, just because of connections and good referral bases and stuff. So I'm very grateful for all the people in Victoria who refer to me. And then pelvic health. Initially, when I first graduated, I actually did some clinical Pilates training, and I worked at a clinic with Di Rizzardo. We worked in the same kind of clinical Pilates studio for, I was there for 7 months before I moved back to the island. And that led me into seeing a lot of patients who were good candidates for pelvic health referrals. And it just kind of got to the point where I thought, well, I'm referring all these people. They love it. They rave about it. I love my pelvic floor colleagues, but I think I can do this. Why am I not doing it myself? I did my pelvic health training during COVID lockdown. I did my theory. And then as soon as clinics opened up again in May of 2020, I went and did the practical stuff. And I've been treating pelvic health ever since.
Yeah, very similar story for me. I was a rower in university and lots of injuries, lots of time in the physio clinic, and terrible physio. I actually found chiro was most beneficial for me when I was rowing, but I don't know if you feel the same. I felt, okay, there's got to be more to this than what we're receiving. So it was almost motivating that, okay, I can do this better, I think, than the way it's being provided. Do you
Definitely, yeah,
find
and
some experience? Yeah.
I think a lot of it, when I look back, I think it was just maybe an older model of physio. It was very manual therapy based. I never got exercises. I didn't really get that much load management, which is all I do with most dancers is load management. Barely even some exercises because they're already doing so much. I never got all the load management I got was like, well, don't jump. Just don't jump. Take some time off. And okay, great. But, I have a 4-year program to get through. I need a little bit more than just don't jump. I didn't even get like solid diagnoses. And looking back now, I know exactly what was wrong with me. I know exactly what the issue was. I know exactly because I treat it all the time. And there was just no real understanding of dance specifically as an activity, which is unfortunate given that they were practicing inside a fine arts building that was purpose built, and there was a gym next door. It was great that we had free access to, but it wasn't done well. So I hope I'm doing it better. I know I'm doing it better than what we had.
I'm sure. I'm sure you are. I think the things we treat the best are the ones that we've had
Yeah.
the issues or the populations that we have the most experience with. So I'm sure you're doing an amazing job at it. So tell me a little bit about, I guess, how that has shaped your practice in terms of working with dancers. So what are maybe some of the most common things that you see in dancers and maybe where things go wrong or yeah, but it goes awry in traditional physio. Let's maybe
Yeah.
chat a little bit about that.
So the majority of dance injuries are lower body, which is not a surprise. There are some upper body injuries that I have seen, especially if you get into contemporary work or in classical ballet, the male dancers doing lifts and things like that. I saw a dislocated elbow once. That was an anomaly that almost never happens, but it did. But most of it is going to be lower body. So most of what I treat is foot and ankle injuries, hip pain, lower back pain, especially in dancers who are doing a lot of like acrobatic type things. A lot of it, about 80% of all dance injuries, are actually overuse injuries. And that comes from overtraining. And, we were kind of talking about this before, but dance doesn't have any regulation. There's no, the traditional way of teaching dance and training dancers is to do more. More is better, but there's no periodization. So a dancer is actually expected to be in dance shape for the entire year, which no other sport expects. Right? Most other sports have a season, and that season is a specific amount of time. I remember talking to my friend who played field hockey at an international level, like Commonwealth Games, Pan Am Games, and still coaches at that level. And they were not playing field hockey the whole year. They were playing field hockey, and then they were playing soccer at other points of the year, and that's at an international level. Dancers are expected to be in shape all year long at 100%. There's no gradual ease in, there's no taper, there's no periodization at all. It's just you are expected to do everything all year round. And when you take time off, periodization is almost used as a threat. So something I heard a lot growing up was if you take 1 week off, it takes 3 weeks to get back into dance. And that's used as a threat, not as a, hey, just so you know, you took some time off, so you should gradually ease back into things, which scientifically just makes sense, right? That's how our bodies work. That's physiology. In every other sport, it's here's your preseason, here's your in-season, here's your post, and here's your off-season. In dance, it's don't take time off because then you have to spend time getting back into it. It's used as a threat, so dancers kind of just keep going. So I see a lot of overuse.
My goodness.
Yeah.
And is that still the culture? Is that
Yes.
even with?
Yes.
Wow.
Definitely.
My goodness.
I will talk about periodization with patients and explain to them, if you're running a marathon, if you're training for a marathon, you are not practicing marathons every week to get ready for that marathon. Even Olympic marathoners are on a training plan. And right before the marathon, they are tapering off so that by the time they get to race day, they're in peak performance mode to then do the race, right? And I say, what do we do in dance? And they look at me and they go, we just add more rehearsals and more classes and we do more. And sometimes the teachers will actually say, you have a competition this weekend, so we're going to do a whole bunch of abs so that your abs are strong, your core is strong for the competition, but you're not going to get stronger in a week. You're just going to fatigue yourselves. Yeah, absolutely. There's more information coming out now. There's more resources that a lot of amazing dance science colleagues are creating to help dance educators learn more about periodization. There are webinars, there are workshops, but often the people that are seeking out that information, it's kind of like preaching to the choir. They're already seeking it out on their own and they're not the worst. But it's absolutely still, it's still the culture. The show must go on and you must be perfect at it. And being out of shape is considered a very, very bad thing, which also encompasses a whole bunch of body image issues within the dance world too. Yeah, lots of tendon problems. That's the majority of what I see, to be honest, is Achilles and yeah.
Yeah, that must be so challenging if you're working with a dancer and there's a certain culture that they're training in, and maybe their coach, I don't know, are coaches open or receptive? You're teaching the dancer maybe about these principles and the dancer is open and receptive, but how do you actually make these changes when they go back into this culture?
So I think that's where the dance knowledge on my part actually comes in handy. A lot of parents will actually come in and they'll say, she has this pain, or my child has this pain, and dancing less is not an option. So what can you do for us? My answer is dancing less is always an option. It's always, always an option. So rather than just saying you need to take time off or you need to cut out classes, I'm making a very specific plan with the dancer. I have like physio forms with checklists and things of like, this is how much you can do. You can jump 50% of the time, or you can jump on these days. Let's look at your full schedule and actually make a very detailed plan of this is what you can do. And I write a note and I say, this is our priority. We are prioritizing fitness for this competition that's coming up so that the teacher understands, okay, we have the same priorities here. You know, this is not the physio saying, just stop dancing, and now I have to deal with pulling this kid from a dance. This is the physio saying, this is how we're going to get the child on stage or the dancer on stage. And then there's a very specific plan of Monday, you're going to do just your jump warm up and you can do these jumps, but don't beat them. And because I have the language, the vocabulary to be able to be specific about that, the teachers tend to trust what I'm saying. It also helps for me in Victoria. A lot of the teachers know me, have met me, know my background, maybe danced with me growing up or have taught me before. And so we have a good rapport in that sense. So I do tell the dancers, the ones that are at studios where the teachers know me, I say, just name drop me, they'll understand. Which is helpful. That is very helpful. I
That's
think in
good.
another
Yeah.
center, like if I was in a larger city that I didn't grow up dancing in, it would be very challenging, a little bit more challenging. But still, the making the plan and saying, no, you can still dance, but we're going to hold back on certain things, or, you know, keeping them in class, I think helps to alleviate some of the anxiety around whether or not I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and I can see just the language piece, you know all the technique and the moves, and that automatically builds credibility
Yep.
too. Have you found that any instructors or teachers, what are they called typically in dance?
So
Teachers,
they're called
instructors?
teachers. I tend to call them dance
Okay.
educators on a kind of broader scale. That's a dance sciencey, I guess, way that we talk about them. But yeah, dance teachers.
Dance teachers. Have you noticed that some of them become more of a sponge and picked up some of this education, indirect education from you, I guess, and started to slowly change maybe the way that they're doing things? Have you noticed that?
Definitely. Yeah. There's a couple schools that I work quite closely with in Victoria, and they'll bring me in to do workshops, not just for their kids, but for
Mm,
their teachers, which is the dream, right? Because
amazing.
a lot of studios will say, hey, come in and do workshops for our students, which I love. I love that. And I'm happy to get the information out there however I can. But it's the schools that say, come and talk to our teachers and our faculty that make the biggest difference. And there's one school in particular in Victoria that had a lot of a specific type of injury one year. And we chatted about it and chatted about, you know, why that specific injury happens and ways of mitigating it. And they made changes both with their conditioning of their dancers. They added plyometrics and they also changed their periodization a little bit. And they're seeing way fewer injuries this year. And it's amazing. It's so
Amazing.
cool because it shows that it works. The difference, though, the challenge with dance is that it's kind of grown separate from sports, and it's because a lot of within the dance community, people don't want to be seen as athletes because there's an artistic aspect to it, right? So we don't really want to be lumped into athletes because of the art, but at the same time we can't ignore the sport physiology and the exercise science that's there, because it's the same bodies that are rowing that are dancing. There's no difference, right? So I mean, training for rowing is going to be drastically different from training for dance in terms of energy systems, but it's the same body. So dance has a little bit, I hesitate to say ego, but there is a little bit of an ego of, you know, we don't want to be completely lumped into the same sport world. But then the world of sport has also not traditionally taken dance seriously. They don't think that we're as difficult as we are. So there are a lot of teachers who get quite defensive about, well, this is the way we do things, sport doesn't understand. Like you wrote us off previously, you thought that we weren't that physical, so we've had to figure it out. We've got it figured out. Thank you. We don't need your help. So it really does take instructors and teachers and educators who are willing to kind of change their mind about things that are ingrained, like from the age of 3, they are ingrained, and be really humble about shifting that paradigm that they have. Yeah, there are definitely a lot of schools who have learned a lot from my practice. Some teachers will even have a bunch of kids that have seen me come into their class with their little their physio forms where I say, this is what you're going to do. And they've come and booked appointments with me. I can think of 2 that booked appointments with me just to sit and chat about, okay, how do I best help my students?
That's great.
Yeah, oh, it's
That's really
amazing.
great.
And I see the results of kids coming into my treatment room and I say, well, what are you doing in your pre-point class? And they list off a whole bunch of exercises that I gave their teacher 5 years ago. And it's amazing. Yeah, so change is happening, and there's a lot of other kind of larger, I guess, organizations involved in trying to make some change. It's slow going because of no regulation or information dissemination. And then, since ego's not the right word, I guess it's more like a sense of pride in how we've always done things. But just
Yeah, you grew up, a teacher grew up dancing a certain way, then it's almost probably, yeah, it can be taken personally, I'm sure. Well, I grew up dancing this way and it worked for me. So I'm going
yes,
to share it and teach the way that I feel it works. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Well, that's great. You're a change maker. That's
Hope
amazing.
so.
You should offer some courses in the future.
Well, there are a lot of I have a lot of dance science colleagues who offer some amazing courses, and so I tend to direct people towards them. There's Erica Mail in North Vancouver, and there's an international dance teaching standards organization, and I think out of California. The International Association of Dance Medicine and Science has webinars. So does Healthy Dancer Canada. That's an organization that I'm a part of. So there actually are a lot of really, really good courses. I really like offering the one-on-one like workshops where I can chat with people. But yeah, if you have any listeners who are interested, they can contact me and I can put them in touch with all the dance science organizations that are out there.
I think your unique training, your background in dance, and then your unique training in pelvic health is probably very valuable and unique. So, why don't we chat a little bit about that, just how those two come together in your practice and what you notice around pelvic health in dancers, specifically for female.
Yeah, it seems like such a random combination, and I thought it was kind of random, but I realized as I started treating both, I thought, wow, I actually do a lot of the same stuff with my dancers that I do with my pelvic health clients. A lot of like hip tension, especially postpartum. We see people that are starting to sit in that hip external rotation, like that turned out position a little bit more. And dancers spend their whole lives in that turned out position. So, with my pelvic health clients, I'm working a lot with trying to get more internal rotation into the hip and more efficiency in hip loading, especially on one leg, how the muscles are all working together. And I do the exact same stuff with my dancers. So the goals are different, but the treatment is actually very, very similar. Lots of lumbopelvic core stability. All of that is kind of the same. I can use a lot of the same exercises. And I went to a dance science conference in the fall, and I went to a bunch of pelvic health related dance sessions, which was so cool. And I sat in this room thinking, oh, I wonder, maybe I'm the only pelvic floor physio and dance physio in here. At one point, they asked a show of hands who in here is a pelvic floor physio, and half the room raised their hands. So there are a
Wow.
lot of us who are realizing that it's quite what's the word I'm looking for? Compatible. They're two very compatible niches. So yeah, there's a lot of crossover. A lot of, I know you probably see in your pelvic pain patients, a lot of like abdominal gripping and a lot of glute gripping, and people spending a lot of time, we tell them to unclench their bum a lot, trying to get more smoothness into breathing into the abdominal muscles, relaxing the abdominal muscles. All of that is the same with dancers. It's the same stuff, same language. And what I've learned through talking to other dance physios who also do pelvic health, there's some really good research being done in Southern California by Dr. Brooke Winder's group, and about 30% of professional dancers have pelvic floor dysfunction, and most of them have never had babies. They're nulliparous. So we know that it's an issue. That number is about the same for gymnasts and skaters, by the way, about 30%. Not trampolinists, right? I think we all know the trampolinist pelvic health dysfunction rate is quite high, but artistic gymnasts, it's about 30%, the same as dancers. Yeah, so there's tons of crossover.
Yeah, and so tell me a little bit about what contributes to that rate of pelvic floor dysfunction in nulliparous women, female dancers.
So some of it is the cueing. So cueing dancers to hold their core, engage their core, feel their core engaged, pull up, which is like basically sucking in so that they're flaring their ribs. You combine that amount of like abdominal gripping and clenching and bracing basically with hips that are constantly externally rotated. And if you're being told just turn out more, and when I say turn out, I mean like external hip rotation, so having your feet kind of pointing out to the side or your toes pointing out to the side. If you are just trying by any means to turn out more, a lot of people end up using their big glute max muscles, their big bum muscles, rather than their deep, smaller rotators. And that just turns into a stability nightmare where they're gripping everything in their core and their glutes. And so we see a lot of just like muscular tension. So that's one thing, just kind of the mechanics of the way that they're being cued. And then the other part of it is that a lot of dancers are hypermobile, right? It's easier to dance if you're bendy. And so there's a lot of bendy people in dance. And I don't know if you've seen this study, I think it came out of Dr. Winder's group in California. They're showing a correlation between hypermobility and pelvic floor dysfunction. And I don't think they necessarily have like very strong answers as to why that correlation is there, but there is a correlation. So you're going to see a higher rate just because of like sample size, I guess, or sample selection. There's more bendy people in dance. And also if you look at, mental health, anxiety, depression, we know that if you have mental health, especially anxiety concerns, your pelvic floor is also going to respond to that. And because of the pressures of dance aesthetically and just being in shape all the time, your pelvic floor is also going to respond to that. So there's a whole bunch of different reasons why it's high, partially because of just like the population itself. And then you add on to that all of the cueing and the fact that they get no downtime.
Well, I was going to say, I'm sure the lack of periodization and overtraining, it's, yeah, you're getting tendon issues, but, the whole muscular system is getting stressed and strained, including the pelvic floor. And it's, got a breaking point, or it's going to fatigue at some point as well, just like the other areas of the body. But it's more of a hidden issue for a lot of people, I'm sure.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of dancers aren't talking about it. I mean, you'll have the odd, like, oh my gosh, I had to pee so bad when I was jumping, I was really holding it in. And that's pretty typical. I think anybody with a full bladder would be aware of not wanting to pee. But I don't think that these dancers are often talking about the fact that they actually are leaking when, I will dig into it. I'll ask them if I have an inkling. So I know that there are kids probably at every studio that are dancing intensely that are peeing a little bit when they jump.
So is it mostly pelvic pain and then incontinence? Are those the two main issues for dancers around pelvic floor?
Yeah. Pelvic pain and leakage. And the pelvic pain, one more thing to add in here too, is that it's a largely female dominant activity. And so just the chances that you're going to have young women with like menstrual related pelvic pain, looking at like endometriosis or PCOS, you're going to have a higher chance of people with uteruses that are misbehaving being in the dance studio as well, which again is going to lead to more pelvic pain. So it's a nice like touch point for me as like getting young women in. I screen all of my dancers for relative energy deficiency, and because of if you don't have enough energy available, i.e. you're not fueling your body enough for the amount of activity that you're doing and you're overtraining, you're at a higher risk for stress fractures. So that's why I screen them. But then from a pelvic health perspective, it's also a nice moment for me to say, how painful are your periods? Are they keeping you home from school or from dance? And by the way, that's not actually normal. Why don't we try to get you a referral so that you can maybe start to figure this out a little bit sooner? And if you're not having that crazy amount of pain, I can at least tell you that it's not normal, and you can maybe help your friends who are having that extreme amount of pain. So it's a good touch point for young women to tell them early how to advocate in terms of menstrual health and pain.
I want to go back to relative energy deficiency because that's something I'm really passionate about. But I want to touch on the piece around the cueing first before we move on to that. So I think this goes back probably to just the culture, right? The way things are cued. And so how, because I mean, I'm not a dance expert in any way, but I see a lot of people who used to be dancers who still hold some of these cues and these habits in their body. And so what effective ways have you found to help change that cueing or that connection in their body while they still remain in a culture where that cueing is prominent?
So a lot of it, well, there's kind of a couple different parts of it. So the first thing I do is explain to them that they don't always need to feel their core working, which I'm sure you also maybe have those conversations with just the general public, because we talk a lot about how important the core is. And so I think a lot of people feel like they need to be holding their core a certain way all day long. And what I remind dancers is it's like having a tag in a new shirt, right? When you first feel it, you're going to feel the muscle working, and eventually it should become second nature, and you're not necessarily going to feel that muscle working anymore. And that's okay. Just because you don't consciously feel it working doesn't mean that it's not working. And I think a lot of dancers, when they get the cue in class, they feel like, oh, well, I have to feel this because my teacher's telling me to feel it. I don't feel it, so I'll just turn up the volume so that I can feel my core working. Okay, I got it. But in the meantime, they've turned up their core to like a bracing volume. So the first thing is letting them know you don't have to feel it on all the time. And then the second one, I do an expectancy violation. So I try to show them how to more subtly use their core and demonstrate that when they're bracing, it's a lot harder to achieve what they want to achieve. And when they're doing it in a more subtle way, it's actually easier. So it gives me that buy-in for them. And then they're more willing to kind of keep progressing that and keep trying it.
What would be an example of that?
So a lot of times dancers will feel pain in their hip when they're doing an extension to the side. So a développé à la seconde, I guess. Yeah. So like off to the side. A lot of people will get pain in the working leg, so the leg that's off the ground. And usually I can see a pattern of they're really gripping in their supporting leg, so the one that's still on the ground. They're gripping in their bum, they're gripping in their core, they're like tucking their pelvis, tucking their tailbone under. And it's actually causing pain in the working leg, the leg that's up in the air, the gesture leg, because that leg is saying, no, we're not going any higher, because if we go higher, you're going to fall over because your base is not stable. So we're going to stop you from going any higher, and we're going to do that with pain kind of in the hip flexor area. But if I get them to more gently turn out their legs, so without all that intense gripping, if I get them to more gently engage their core without all that intense gripping, and focus on just a couple of really specific cues about like imagining something pulling into their hip crease so that it's bringing them down instead of up. That's a very dancer specific thing. If anyone is a dancer listening, they might understand that. But basically just trying to get them to do everything more subtly, they'll usually find that there's less pain. First of all, their leg might go a little bit higher and it will look nicer. And then they say, oh, that's easier. I feel more on my leg, which is something we say to kind of say that we have good balance. If you're on your leg, it means you're not going to fall over. You feel stable and they don't have as much pain. The leg is higher, all that.
Oh, I love that. What did you call that technique where you show them how to do something and they feel different in their body?
An
You had some
expectancy
fancy.
violation. I did not make that up. That came from it was an in-service once at a clinic on pain science and helping folks with chronic pain create these expectancy violations. And it was more, I think the context that it was introduced to me in is, telling patients, hey, you can know that this specific movement isn't unsafe, right? So if you're thinking back pain and bending forward, we can tell you till the cows come home that it is safe to bend forward, even though you have pain, right? We can tell you that your tissue is not being damaged when you bend over, but your body doesn't know that. And so we have to kind of create these violations of what your body is going to expect. So if we can find a way to get you to bend forward gently, we teach your brain, guess what? That wasn't what you expected. That actually felt better. And then slowly continue to progress those expectancy violations. Then that's one way of helping to reduce chronic pain. I feel like it needs a different name. Violation.
I use that technique all the time in my practice. I just never had heard it named as that. I've never heard that term before. So it's interesting. Yeah, I always learn something new from everybody who I have on, which is awesome.
It's a nice compact term. It makes sense.
Yeah. So, yeah, to go back to pelvic health and dancers, and I know we want to chat about REDS a little bit, but maybe we'll jump into some social media first, and then we'll
Mm.
come back to the relative energy deficiency. Social media is obviously huge around information that's out there and education, but there's also a lot of misinformation around health. And I think you mentioned around pelvic health and dancers. So, would love to dive into that a little bit. Can you share what's been going on in the social media world?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's no surprise that social media has got no nuance. And so a lot of the information that's out there, both about pelvic health and just like bodies in general and medicine and wellness and all of that, there's no nuance. It's all kind of clickbait, rage bait, simple statements about wellness, about health. You can add nuance obviously in a caption, but most people aren't going to take the time to read the caption. And so, yeah, I just see a lot of people coming in saying, well, they have these beliefs that the answer is actually it depends. It's a much more nuanced conversation, but social media is really good at making things seem very black and white. And yeah, so I see it in pelvic health. I'm sure you do too. I will say, I think a lot of the pelvic health information online that's coming from pelvic floor physios is actually pretty good. Like, I think as a profession, we're generally pretty good. It's the pelvic health information that's coming from non-physios that I think can be all over the map. And
Mhm.
dancers, it's the same. The information from dance physios is actually very good, but there's a lot coming out from maybe just like dance trainers or coaches who grew up in that world and don't have any extra training in anatomy or physiology that are just giving these kids almost false hope that they can do some magical exercises and their dancing will just get better. They'll magically be more flexible. They'll magically have more turnout. And it's just not that simple. So, yeah, I guess I see that a lot. And I think as a parent, I see that too. Do these magical things
For
and your
sure.
child will
Yeah.
sleep properly. Nope, that's not going to happen. So, yeah, I see it.
Everyone's so different.
Yeah.
Everyone's so different. Yeah.
And I think that's the thing is that there should be nuance and everybody is so different and everybody's body is so different. In dance, it becomes a bigger discussion about what is dance supposed to look like and should we expect every body to fit into a specific mold. Some people's hips just don't have the bony mobility to do that. At a certain point, if you have a deep acetabulum, so the socket part of your hip joint, if that is deeper than the average person, you're just not going to be able to get your leg up as high because there's a bone in the way. Should we be expecting bodies to all fit into this same aesthetic mold because that's what the art looks like? Or can we talk a little bit more about, well, ballet can look different depending on your body? But that's nuance that social media just doesn't have. I wish there was a way for it to have more nuance, but it doesn't really.
Well, and I think it's the same thing that comes up in exercise classes and probably even just dance classes too, right? It's so hard to give cues to a large group of people because everybody is going to extract different things from that cue. They're going to interpret it differently in their body, and their bodies are going to do different things. Like, for example, engage your core, right? 10 different people are going to do that in maybe 10, maybe not 10, but they're going to do it in very different ways, right? So that's, I think, just the ongoing challenge of providing general information is it just is not individualized for the person in
Exactly.
front.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I think, you may not have 10 different ways of engaging the core, but you're definitely going to have 10 different like perspectives, 10 different contexts, right?
So, speaking of fitting into a mold, I think that ties really nicely into relative energy deficiency because that's, I think, part of it. This is something I'm really passionate about. I grew up in a lightweight sport, so always had to cut weight, and we did some very, very unhealthy things and lots of overtraining just to try to cut weight. And so, it's something that I've spent a lot of years learning from and kind of recovering from and changing my training and just being able to listen to my body. And also in that evolution, learning that less is more and you can still reach your goals and improve without some of these really toxic patterns. And I see it all the time too, just even in the gym culture. And I don't know if you know much about high rocks. I've gotten into high rocks recently and just some of the overtraining that I'm seeing that's happening around that. But, anyways, that's a long winded statement. But something I'm really passionate about and educating people on is relative energy deficiency and also, training smarter and not harder. So, how does that show up in your practice with dancers? And how do you, I know it's very prevalent in the dance world. So, how do you incorporate that into your practice in terms of when you're working with dancers?
Yeah, so I mean, it shows up in the dance world I would say in two ways. There's kind of the typical or more commonly understood prevalence of like eating disorders in dance. It's common to see eating disorders in like pre-professional dancers and professional dancers, and there are like schools, ballet schools, professional ballet schools that are actually perpetuating eating, like disordered eating behaviors and causing eating disorders. A quick little Google search about the reckoning that is happening in like European professional dance schools will show that. So there's the disordered eating aspect of it where, you know, people are being asked to fit into a specific aesthetic, I mean, wildly subjective and quite arbitrary aesthetic mold, but they're being asked to fit into that mold. And so relative energy deficiency is coming up as a result of that. And then there's the inadvertent relative energy deficiency that I don't think that gets talked about enough. And that's, you know, there's a lot of dancers who at the age of 18, 19 will move away from home for the first time to go to a training program, and they maybe don't know how to cook, or they're in a new country and the food's unfamiliar, or they're in a homestay and they don't like the food, or they're in a training program that just doesn't give them the literal time to eat, right? Or I see high school dancers who are dancing, this drives me crazy, but they're dancing before school and then they're dancing within their school schedule. They have a class that's like a high school dance class, and then they dance at lunchtime doing dance clubs so they don't eat their lunch. And then they go to the studio at like 3:30 in the afternoon and they're there till 9:30. And they get a 15, maybe not even 15-minute break. They don't even get a break in that time. I had a dancer recently, when I said, "When do you eat dinner?" They said, "Oh, I kind of inhale something between 6:02 and 6:05 when I have to get into my next class." So the inadvertent relative energy deficiency, I think, is what we don't pay as much attention to, where they're not technically having disordered eating behaviors consciously. It's that they don't even realize that they're not eating enough food, or what they're eating in the summertime when they're not dancing at all is fine. And then they all of a sudden they go into a wild schedule in September and they don't change their calorie intake at all. So it shows up a lot. I also think that like speaking of social media, current culture doesn't help teenage girls with, you know, dance aside, it doesn't help. Yeah, I screen with all of my intake forms. So I worked with a dietitian colleague of mine who works in eating disorders or eating disorder care, and she helped me kind of create a section of my intake form that is eating disorder aware, she said. So I will ask if a patient has ever had any concern or any mental health struggle related to food, so including disordered eating, either formally diagnosed or self-identified, if they've ever struggled with their relationship with food. And then I do also ask in my intake form about irregular or missed periods, and then I actually define it for people because it's quite different for teenagers and adults. So a teenager, an irregular period, it takes a cycle of longer than like 45 days to be considered irregular, because a lot of young girls, when they first get their periods, or young people when they first get their periods, it's still kind of regulating itself, whereas for adults it's over 35 days is irregular. So I define that for people and I ask the question, and they can prefer not to answer if they don't want to. They don't have to answer, but then it's there. They know that I'm thinking about it. They know that hopefully they know that I'm a safe place to discuss it if there is a history, and I explain why. I say I'm screening for bone density issues because stress fractures, especially in the tibia and the midfoot, so the tibia being the shin bone in your lower leg, is common in dancers. Yeah, very common.
Yeah, I had 3 or 4 stress fractures during my rowing years, but I was on birth control. So very hard to, oh, my period's regular,
Yeah.
normal, right? The period's not always a classic marker for a lot of people, especially if they're on some sort of birth control. Yeah, it's so interesting. And I think it's a good point, the inadvertent relative energy deficiency. I think I see a lot in people who are starting to, get into different workouts and sport maybe, or just competitions, or running at a later stage in life. They're just more is better, harder is better, and not understanding how much fuel needs to come into that. And then also, fueling and recovering in between your workouts and everything as well. So I can see how that mix of the culture And then the overtraining, the lack of periodization, and then just the lack of time and everything too. That alone is a huge recipe. And then if you add in any toxic culture around body image, is that still, I know you were mentioning some schools in Europe, is that still a big issue here in Canada as well, the body image piece?
So the body image piece, I think, will always be an issue. Like that, I think,
Yeah.
unfortunately, the history of it is very interesting. It wasn't always like this. If anyone's heard of George Balanchine, he's kind of one of the most famous choreographers. He started the New York City Ballet. And before he created the New York City Ballet, the image of a dancer's body was very different. But he decided that dancers should look like prepubescent, short women. Like that's what he created for some very toxic reasons. And that is what has stuck. So it doesn't have to be that way, but he created that.
Thanks, George. Is that his name,
Yeah.
George?
Thanks, George.
It's a
Yeah.
lot, George. Of course.
Thanks so much. So, yeah, I think the body image thing, that's going to take a very long time to fix. I know that in the news reports that are coming out of some European schools, I mean, they were weighing kids and they're controlling the food that is served and things like that. Not every European school, I should say, but there are some that are under fire at the moment. I don't know. I think in Canada, hopefully, I would hope that things are better. But again, I don't have any personal experience of what things are actually like. I think that there just is a general societal pressure. I think the schools, it depends on your school. So sorry, not the professional schools, but like studios at a recreational level. It depends on your school and your teacher. But I think the pressure will always be there, I guess. I was also going to mention too that there's a group called REDI. So they're trying to look at the very specific cultural aspects of dance. And so rather than relative energy deficiency in sport, so REDS, they're looking at relative energy deficiency in dance, REDD. And so that's a group with dance specific resources. So teachers, resources to help teachers screen for relative energy deficiency and healthcare providers. And it's exciting to have it addressed on a more kind of systemic level, that inadvertent aspect of it too. So, and even just language, because there are some people who are told in sport too, oh yeah, losing your period means that you're training enough. And if you get your period back, you're not training hard enough. I have heard that from
What?
friends in sport.
No.
And I gave a workshop last week, and when I said, losing your period's not a good thing, I saw eyes go wide because they clearly heard that they didn't know that it wasn't a good thing. Yeah, I think that's actually still more common than we think it is in terms
Oh,
of
that makes me so upset. I think it happens enough on its own. You don't actually need to strive for that. That's crazy.
It is crazy. And I think, when you look at gymnastics as a really good example, I grew up thinking gymnastics stunts your growth, right? That was just something that was said, like, oh yeah, gymnastics stunts your growth. No, it doesn't. It doesn't. Relative energy deficiency affects your growth. And they all have relative energy deficiency, like that's what's stunting. It's not that the activity itself, those athletes are fierce, they are strong, but if they're also in this culture of fitting into an aesthetic mold, which a lot of them are, I think things are shifting in gymnastics for the better. But that's why they all looked the way that they looked, was because back in the 90s, is because they were all also energy deficient. And now, the Olympic gymnasts these days, they don't look the same as they did in Atlanta 96. It's not gymnastics that stunts your growth. It's not fueling your body that stunts your growth,
Yeah. Yeah, I think a few of the American gymnasts have really shifted that over the years. Some of the Europeans historically have just been so thin and slender, but we've had some of these not big, but like strong, jacked females come on the scene who are just crushing it. And I think it's been amazing because it's like, okay, you don't need to look waif-like to win gold medals. And yeah, you're actually more likely probably to win gold medals when you're not.
Absolutely.
Not
Simone Biles is one
thin.
giant muscle. She's just one giant ball of muscle that flies through the air, and she's short, but I think she's just a short person. But yeah, they're shifting things, and gymnastics is a really good example, actually. If we go back to the dance regulation, they have regulation. It failed their gymnasts recently with the abuse cases that were going on. But what was interesting about gymnastics was obviously the perpetrator, the doctor that abused the gymnasts on the USA team, he was to blame. Clearly, he made choices to abuse young women and girls. But the greater conversation was that USA Gymnastics did not do their job to protect the girls, which was almost worse, right? It was their job to protect them. What's also interesting is that if you follow it, which I obviously have, if you follow it, they've made a lot of changes to USA Gymnastics because the infrastructure is there for them to improve the protection of these gymnasts. Dance doesn't even have that. We don't have any sort of structure. So if anything like that were to happen, there's no one to hold accountable to protect dancers. There's nothing. There's no code of ethics. There's no code of conduct. There's nobody accountable. Dance teachers aren't even required to have criminal record checks. So, you can be whoever you want and teach dance. USA Gymnastics, it didn't work, but the infrastructure was there to change, and now it's hopefully working. Dance has got nothing. So abuse is rampant.
I bet.
Right? Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't realize about this whole unregulated piece and the impact that it could have on young, vulnerable people.
Growing bodies. Yeah. It's a lot.
It's scary. Yeah. So to wrap up, what are the top 3 things that you feel dance would benefit from improving on from a physio who has pelvic health and dance background and training?
I think the biggest one is cueing. And that's probably the easiest one to fix. And it's the same with fitness instructors, to be honest. Like, I think I'm speaking about it from a dance perspective, but I think fitness instructors in general, when you're cueing the core, rather than just simply engaging the core or, making it seem like your core has to be on all the time, talking a little bit more about nuance and talking about, I don't know if you've taken any of Anthony Lowe's courses, but he says tension to task all the time. So that just means you don't need as much core engagement to pick up a piece of paper as you do to deadlift 100 pounds, right? So making sure that you're not engaging your core to an extreme degree just to stand, so that type of cueing, I think, could really be easily changed. And for dance instructors too, to just be aware of anatomy, like actual anatomy, like what do the muscles actually do? Because there are a lot of cues that really lock down the core and the pelvis that don't need to be there. And I don't need to get into the specifics of that because I don't think I could describe it properly, but just being aware, if you're going to use cues about muscles, actually make sure that you know what those muscles do. Don't just go off of what you think they do. Make sure you know what they do. And if you don't know what they do, choose a different cue. And maybe even within class, give dancers a chance. Cue them to relax their abdominals. Normalize that. Normalize after an exercise. Okay, everybody relax your core. Take a couple smooth, slow breaths. Relax it so that we're not spending an hour and a half gripping it for dear life. I think that could go a long way. And also just normalizing relaxing your core and letting your belly go, everybody can benefit from letting it all hang out. And we don't need to be so afraid of showing our relaxed abdominal muscles. So that's one big thing. I think dance teachers screening for relative energy deficiency is a really big thing, and being aware of that. And
just talking about it, normalizing it, what this is, what does this even mean, and what does it look like?
Exactly. What does it look like? And also being aware that it's a thing and not overtraining dancers, giving them a rest and shifting that culture of you have to be on 100% of the time all year round, allowing rest, making rest an important part of actually getting stronger, because we know that you need rest and recovery to actually get stronger. That would be the second thing. And obviously the third thing is regulation, but that's a bigger issue, I think. So maybe instead, to tag on to the last one, give your dancers dinner breaks, please. Give them dinner and pee breaks so that they're not holding their pee all day long or all class long. And then also they have time to actually eat and relax and chill out.
I think the regulation piece is an important one, though, and something I wasn't aware of, and really interesting discussion. And I could see where lots could go awry with that lack of regulation. Yeah,
and we are working on it. I'm on a working group. I'm on a committee where we're taking our first steps to try and work on what that would look like indirectly. We have to take baby steps to get there. So yeah, I rant about it, but we are actually trying to do something about it. And that's around the world.
You're allowed to rant when you're actually actively involved in working towards a solution, right? Exactly. When people rant but don't do anything about it, that's not good. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. That was an awesome discussion. I always learn a lot from the guests that come on, and I'm sure our listeners did as well. So if anyone wants to find you or connect with you, what's the best way for them to do so?
So my Instagram is Tidal Motion Physio, and you can also feel free to email me, Alex at Tidal Motion Physio.
Awesome. Well, I'll share those links as well in the episode. Well, thank you so much, Alex. I really appreciate your time. And thanks everyone for tuning in to another episode of TMI Tuesdays. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you again next Tuesday. Bye. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of TMI Tuesdays. Women's health is complex, nuanced, and deserves better conversations. If this episode resonated with you, I would absolutely love if you followed and subscribed to the podcast on Spotify and shared it with someone who might need to hear it. We'll see you again next Tuesday.